Bonjour, Kinamagene Ireland Indigenicas, and welcome to today's social studies lesson. Today's episode, the beginning of chapter 2, section 3, on the Eastern Woodlands. We'll begin here with Turtle Island, also known as North America. We have Canada to our north, Alaska to our far northwest, Mexico and Central America to our south, the Pacific Ocean on the west, and the Atlantic Ocean on the east. You can see Michigan's outline here with our Great Lakes. We began our exploration in the region of the Pacific Northwest, which stretches from Alaska down to Northern California. You can see there are mountains and valleys full of trees, even some snow-capped mountains here. Cedar was one of the prime trees that they used. They built plank homes, did a lot of fishing, salmon, whales, other marine animals. Then we moved to the southwest, which is a much more dry environment. We had the pueblos here, which were these immense, almost like apartment buildings built into the cliffs. We used bricks made of adobe. Much more arid, so wasn't going to be the same kind of agriculture. Smaller game would have been present here. Today we're going to skip over the Great Plains, and we'll come back to them. And we're going to get to this region over here, the Eastern Woodlands. The Eastern Woodlands is a ginormous area that goes from way up here in Canada down all the way to the Gulf Coast. We will kind of try to break it up at points between the north and the south parts of this region. And you should be familiar with a lot of the studies in this lesson will be things we already know, particularly when we talk about the northern regions, because our homeland is in this northern region. Our migration story starts over here and the movement into Lake Superior. And so there's a lot of our history of our people is going to be in this northeast region. So it should be easy to have this to look into as we compare it to other regions of the country. Today I'm going to read to you the text. It's a little bit longer one, so I'm going to save some of the extra commentary for the next lesson. We do see there are questions to guide inquiry, like how did the physical characteristics of place impact the lives of American Indian groups in various regions? 2, how was the culture of the Eastern Woodland American Indians influenced by the way people adapted to and used the climate and natural resources of the area? Some vocabulary, trade, the buying, selling, exchanging of goods. Woodlands, areas of land covered with many trees, also known as forests. Boundary, a line that separates the land of one group from the land of another. We might use the term border in this case. And confederacy, an alliance of groups that come together for a purpose. Dividing the region. A large area of evergreen and deciduous trees and forests, known as woodlands, was home to many American Indian tribal groups. These groups had many differences. They spoke different languages, had different customs, houses, and government systems. They did, however, have some similarities. They lived in a region filled with many rivers, lakes, animals, and an abundant supply of trees. How they lived depended on where they settled in this region. Because this region encompasses a large amount of land, there are many differences between the American Indian civilizations that settled there. So to better understand the settlements of these American Indians, the Eastern Woodlands has been divided into sub-regions, the Northeast and the Southeast. Moving on to page 30. You can see a map over here, the Northeast and the Southeast, Pacific Northwest, the Southwest, we have the Plateau, the Great Plains, amongst others. One of these American Indians used to forest was to build houses. One group in particular, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois, used trees to build longhouses, which were long wooden homes that held more than one family. Longhouses were like the apartments of today. Other types of woodland homes include the wigwam or birch bark home. Trees were also used to make boats, clothing, and tools. The boats would be used on the rivers and lakes as a form of transportation. These rivers and lakes became important for the establishment of trade between groups. Trade is the buying, selling, or exchanging of goods. This allowed goods to be moved to areas where they were not common or could not be found. An example would be that one group traded corn products like ground meal for birch bark baskets, which came from birch trees only available in other areas. American Indians fished the many rivers and lakes and hunted in the woodlands for their food. Deer was commonly hunted and the hide was used for clothing. Rabbits and turkey were other animal food sources. Farming was also a common way to get food, but growing seasons weren't very long due to the climate. Because, next page, 31, they had all 4 seasons and cold winters, American Indians in the Northeast had to use their resources differently than the tribes of the Southeast. The Southeast provided a different landscape for tribes who lived there. While much of the land was woodland, there were also coastal plains with saltwater marshes, river valleys, mountains, and the Everglades. The climate in the Southeast was milder, which allowed growing seasons for crops to be longer. Trees played an important role in the lives of Indians in the Southeast. They were used to make tools, houses, and boats for transportation and trading. Forests were used to hunt game and gather nuts and berries. Rivers and coasts were also the source for fish and seafood. For shelter, these Indians built chickees covered with palm leaves, as well as shelters on stilts to protect them from high water, snakes, and crawling insects. So we start on the southeast, and now we're going to move to the northeast and talk about the Iroquois, or Iroquois, depending on who you are talking to. And you can see that they are located in what's now New York, Pennsylvania, primarily, even into Quebec, but right along the coast. They did have influence much greater than this map here of the Confederacy. As mentioned earlier, the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, were a tribe of the Northeast. They were an important group that established a confederacy, which is an alliance of groups that came together for a purpose. It is a kind of government. There were originally 5 tribes that were a part of the Iroquois Confederacy. The tribes were the Mohawk, Seneca, Oneida, Onondaga, and Cayuga. But Tuscarora later joined the Confederation, bringing the Confederacy to 6 tribes or nations. Land was communally used between these nations, but boundaries, lines that separates the land of one group from the land of another, were used for hunting and farming. It is important to note, though, that the Iroquois nations believed that no one person owned the land. In order to come together and agree on issues, these nations were governed by the Great Council, which was made up of between 8 and 14 representatives. The representatives, let's go to the next page, 32. The representatives were chosen by the clan mothers, and they would meet to discuss and come to a consensus on political topics. To learn about the Iroquois and the Confederacy, follow the link. Be sure to note the interesting government structure, the roles of men and women, and the resources they used and how they used them. We'll be talking a little bit about that in an upcoming lesson. The Creek. The Creek Indians, also known as the Muskogee, were a group that lived along the rivers of the Southeast in North America. They too had a confederacy. Each town chose a leader, and the leaders would meet with townspeople to make decisions. These meetings were typically carried out in the roundhouse, which is a key structure of the central plaza of a Creek village. Creek villages had a central plaza where they would have religious ceremonies, festivals, dances, and meetings. Beyond the central plaza were homes made with mud and a thatched roof, and beyond the homes was land used for farming. To learn more about the Creek, follow this link. Pay close attention to men's and women's roles in Creek villages, as well as how they use their natural resources. Do you see similarities and differences between the Iroquois and the Creek? And even further, do you see the differences between both of these groups and us here in Michigan? This reaches the conclusion of this reading. You may now return to the Google Classroom for further instruction. Bamapi.